Hey, I'm Kate, the teacher and founder at Project Patterns. I started Project Patterns as a place to share my love and enthusiasm at pattern cutting with everyone. So hopefully you'll get a little bit of that here. So every month I pick a topic and I deep dive into that topic. This month I've chosen geometric pattern cutting. So pattern cutting with shapes, circles, rectangles, squares, that kind of thing. So far we've looked at circles. Now I want us to have a quick look at something that we can do with rectangles. This gorgeous oversized little jacket is made up of a series of rectangles. Now we're going to cheat a little bit and put a bit of a shoulder angle on our body rectangle. Let's put a shoulder seam, angle off a little bit, just so we don't get quite like pointy shoulders like that. Don't want to go full 80s here. The thing that's really exciting about this garment is the sleeve. So if we have a look at this, can you see that it's almost a triangle shape? It's stitched together here. So what we have is a rectangle that folds over this way and folds over this way and stitches together. Our piece literally looks like this. What it does is fold once, fold twice, stitch together there, leave a little gap there, and that's how we get it. It's really clever and really beautiful, really effective. One thing we need to think about here is our fabric and how we get it into the garment. So I've chosen to do this in a stripy jersey because I just love a stripe, and any kind of square or rectangle pattern is a really good excuse to play with stripes. I've also chosen to go for quite a fitted neckline, and because I have a fitted neckline, I've then put an opening down my centre front. Again, another excuse to play with stripes and a little placket there. But you could have your centre front closed and do more of a scooped neckline or a V-neck. That means that you'd be able to get your head through this. There are also a couple of measurements that we need to think about when we draft this. The first one is our hip measurement here, because you can see our sleeve doesn't actually add any extra width through the hip. So our body is going to be drafted using that hip measurement plus a little bit of ease. That measurement of our body is going to determine the length of these cuts here on our piece for our sleeve. You'll see what I mean when we start drafting. We also want to think about the length of our garment. Now I've made this down to kind of the hip area. You can make it longer, you can make it shorter, it's entirely up to you. So let's have a quick look at how we draft this pattern. This is what our garment looks like when it's flat. We can see we still have our centre front opening and our placket, but our body is completely flat. There's no darts or anything in there. It's literally based off of a rectangle. Then we also have our lovely sleeves here, which are other rectangles that literally fold to create a nice triangular shape like this. Now our front and our back are the same except for our centre front seam and our neck shape. So you're a little bit lower at the front and we're higher at the back. But it is literally the same kind of box shape with our rectangles on here. So let's have a quick look at our pattern. Our pattern looks like this. Here is our placket. Here is our front piece, which is cut a pair, and our back piece, like I said, is an exact mirror of that, but with a different neckline here. And obviously it's on the fold. Now our beautiful sleeve looks like this when it's folded up. When I unfold it, it's just a rectangle. The back edge here, this long edge, stitches to our back edge here. And then when it folds over, this shorter edge here stitches to this top section of our piece here for our front. And when this folds over, the shorter section here stitches to the lower piece of our front here. And then we just stitch a little section here, leaving a nice hole for our arm to poke through there. So simple, but so effective. So first of all, we're going to draft rectangles for these pieces. Now we can leave it with a squared shoulder, but it gets very pokey at the shoulder and honestly it's not that great. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to shape our shoulder down like this. We're going to use our block to help us do this. Then we're going to draft this rectangle. Now when we're drafting this rectangle, we're going to use a couple of key measurements to help us. First of all, we want the length of our garment, and then the width of our rectangle is going to be 1/4 of our hip measurement plus some ease. Now the dimensions for this rectangle are determined by the length of this seam. Like I said, the back stitches to the long edge, so this long edge, the length of our rectangle, needs to be the same length as our back armhole here. Then the length the width rather of our rectangle is determined by the length of this seam here, because it folds over and over, and these two edges, the short edges, stitch to the front. So they need to be half of the length of this. Then obviously our placket, we're going to step our centre front back slightly to allow room for our placket to be made and stitched on there. And then once we've done that, we can twirl it. So I'm going to get my rectangles and we can get started. For the length of my rectangle, I've chosen to do my garment 33 centimeters. So that's measuring from my highest shoulder point here, the highest point of my rectangle, and going somewhere around here, so sort of my lower hip area. It's a standard measurement for a jacket. So that's going to be the length of my rectangle. Then for the width of my rectangle rather, I'm going to do 46 centimeters, because that's what my hip measurement is here, the widest point of my body that my rectangle needs to fit around. So to get the width of my rectangle, I'm going to take 46 centimeters, my hip measurement. I'm going to add my ease to it. So I'm adding 5 centimeters of ease here. This is half scale, so 10 if you're doing full scale. And then I'm dividing it by 4, because remember we're drafting in quarters. So 46 plus 5, divide that by 4, gives me 12.75. That means that my rectangles, which I've drafted here, are 33 centimeters in length and 12.75 in width. Like I said, our back we are drafting on the fold, and then our front we are drafting singular. So let's have a quick think about this. Remember that we want to use our blocks for our necklines. If this edge is my centre front, then I can simply put my block on there, matching up my centre front, my shoulder point with my top line there, and trace my new neckline on. And I also want to use my front shoulder angle. So I'm just going to start that there, trace on the first bit, trace on the second bit, and then I'm going to use my pattern ruler to elongate that. So this is my front neck and this is my shoulder. Now let's do our back. So going over here, I know that I have a little bit extra length through my back, my cross back here. So my back neck is a little bit longer. It doesn't quite align. If I put that on there, I can show you. If I line up my centre back with that line, you see it's slightly off there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring my centre back and centre front together. And I'm going to make a little mark here. Then I'm going to keep my back parallel to my centre back edge there, my folded edge, lining up my shoulder point with the little notch we drew, and then I can draw in that new shoulder. Now I want to make sure that my shoulder angles are the same, because I want my lengths to be the same at my seam there. So let's measure how far we came down with our shoulder angle here. So from the top of my rectangle down there is 2.5. So then I'm simply going to go to my shoulder point here, measure down 2.5 and draw in that new shoulder line. Then in theory, they should be the same length and they're at the same angle. And it means that our line here, our kind of side seam, is the same length. Fabulous. So then we just want to pop some seam allowance onto the back. And then on our front, we want to make room for our placket. So this meets edge to edge at the centre front. When we have a placket, we always step our seam back slightly so that when our pieces overlap, the centre front is dead in the middle of the placket. So I'm going to make my placket 1 centimetre wide, which would be 2 centimetres in full scale. So we step our placket seam back by half the width of our placket. So if my placket is going to be 1 centimetre wide, then I need to step this seam back by half a centimetre. Then I'm going to add some seam allowance on here. And it's kind of handy that my seam allowance that I'm adding is 0.5 centimetre. So I'm going to use my original centre front line as my cut line rather than rubbing out and redrawing. Lovely. Okay, then to draft our placket, we're simply going to draft a rectangle, the length of our centre front, and 2 centimetres wide, so we can fold it in half. And there it is, our lovely placket. So remember, I've done double width, so I can fold it in half like this, and I've marked my fold line and my grain line on there. Wonderful. Okay, so now we can start doing the fun bit. We can start to do our lovely little triangle sleeves like this. Remember, we said the length of our rectangle is going to be the length of our back seam. The width of our rectangle is going to be half the length of our front seam. So let's give that a quick measure. My back length is 30.5. In theory, this should also be 30.5. Boom, lovely, love it when that happens. So 30.5 divided by 2 is 15.25. So that means that our rectangle width is going to be 15.25 and our length is going to be 30.5. So let's quickly draft a rectangle to those dimensions. And just like magic, there it is. So I've drafted my rectangle to 15.25 in my width and 30.5 in my length. I've also cut away all the excess paper on my front and back pieces so that we can easily see how this is going to jigsaw together. So on my back piece here, this long edge stitches to here, and we don't need to do anything with that, right? We can just leave that as is and put some notches on there. Now for my front piece, these edges are going to fold down and they're going to stitch to my front armhole here, which, I mean, it's the wrong side, so we'll pop that over that way. So again, we don't have to do anything to adjust these lengths, they already fit. We just need to pop some notches on. So we know that this point here of our seam is at the midpoint of this seam here. So I'm just gonna fold this closed. So I find my midpoint that way. Then I'm just gonna draw in a notch. And that will indicate that my seam goes there. Then on these edges here, I'm going to put my front annotation lines. So if I fold this so that I have a corner there and these edges are touching, that should get me to my midpoint there. Then I'm going to do the same thing on this side here. So from my corner there, making sure those edges are parallel. And that's how our piece is going to fold like that. So these edges here, I want to just put some matching notches annotations on. So first of all, I'm going to say front. Then I'm also going to put a notch halfway between this notch on my shoulder and this notch and the hem, and then I'll put a notch halfway here. So folding so that my stitch line hits my notch there. That's my halfway. And the same thing here, so that my stitch point on my shoulder there hits there. And then again here, halfway, halfway. And if we want to, we can double check that as well. If we put this over here, stitch point on there, stitch point on there, and those fold marks are in exactly the same place. So then we can grab our notcher. We can notch our fold line there. We can also draw this in, absolutely fine, if you want to make it really clear for yourself. If I were drafting this commercially, then yes, I would be drawing it in like this at a 90-degree angle. And this notch is just to show where my folded line comes to. And then I'm also going to mark in these notches here. And then for my back edge, which is this edge here, I'm going to write back. And then my notches for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin these together. So point together there and point together there. And I'm going to pin them so they can't move. All 3 layers of paper together here. And then I'm simply going to notch them all together. I don't need to measure where my notches are going. I'm going to do notches that are close together, like a double notch, because that's how we indicate the back. But I don't need to go and measure each piece separately. I know that my notches are going to match because I've literally notched them together with the pieces correctly matched up. Lovely. So that's our pattern. Of course, we have our placket here as well. If we need to think about our stripe directions, I've got my grain line on my front here, which is also my stripe direction. And then when these pieces fold together like this, I want my stripes to be going opposite to my body. So that means that my grain direction is going to be here with my stripes. So when I open this up, I can draw that properly, drawing it parallel to my straight edge. Popping an arrow on the bottom as always, rubbing out this little temporary one, and my back, my stripes are parallel to my centre back, which I've already marked on there. If you want, you can start to think about facings and stuff as well, but for now we'll leave it there with our nice simple outer pattern. Now let's have a quick recap of what this looks like on the stand. So remember, this is what our lovely little jacket looks like on the stand. Now there are heaps of different ways that you can change this and tweak it to make it more your style or more what you would like to wear. So this, of course, is quite oversized. And we've used our whole side seam for our sleeve to attach to. You could make a sleeve that stops here. So it would be shorter rectangle and it wouldn't be as wide either, because remember, the length of this seam also determines the width of our rectangle. All you need to do is have your opening on your side seam up until this point, and then when you stitch it, anything below that actually stitches front and back together. You also don't have to have a placket on the centre front. You could make this more of a blouse or a top, and you could do a V-neck, or you could do a little keyhole opening at the back as well. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you want to find more, you can find me on my website, projectpatterns.co.uk, and you can see all my other videos that I've been posting throughout the month and before. I am doing a free live workshop as well, so if you're watching this in September, go and check out my website. You can book onto that for free. See you later, guys. Bye.